Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley, and here's your host, Alan Mosley.
Welcome back to the Gold Standard for episode 24.
24.
This is really getting out of hand.
We're getting about that marriage age.
Yeah.
You know.
What? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to say?
I'm saying that most people get married between the ages of like 23 and 25.
Well,
being in the wedding industry, I should know.
I'll tell you what, Blake, I'm not most people.
I know you're not.
Okay.
I know you're not.
Well, hold on. We have somebody else here today who's not most people, but we're not ready for that yet. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, it is at Alan M. Mosley. It's Facebook. It's facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. And really, you don't have to do any of that because you can just go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com.
That's right. That's right. And you've been two-timing on me.
Uh-oh.
You were in Knoxville.
I
heard you were talking to somebody over there.
I was in Knoxville.
Yes, you were.
We don't. Tis a silly place. We don't talk about that. So I don't know how much you've seen it because I don't actually keep up with you. People think we're not actually friends. We actually just do the show and then we don't talk anymore. But we act pretty good.
Yeah. No, we
so
talk
there's been some talk in the news. We do a recurring segment on the show called Jeff Sessions Sucks.
Yes, he sucks.
And you might be surprised to find this, but we do that recurring segment because he sucks all the time.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Really.
So that's pretty much going to be our entire topic of discussion today. And really, who better to discuss that than Mike Maharrey, who is National Communications Director of the 10th Amendment Center. And for the purposes of today, he's the author of Godarchy, which you can find at godarchy.org.
Right.
And let me just say something about Mike real quick before we go any further. So Mike is just really a congenial guy, could get along with anybody.
Okay.
I don't know if Mike can get along with Jeff Sessions.
I don't think anybody can.
Mike, can you get along with Jeff Sessions?
No, I hate that guy.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. I mean,
I think that's a wrap there, right?
That
pretty much sums it up.
That's good. But just for the sake of having another take, let's go a little bit deeper into that. So, Mike, I want to start off. I'm not even going to pull up the article and stuff just yet. I just want to start off by saying, I follow you on social media, which is great.
Yeah.
If you're not using Twitter and Facebook to subscribe to things like the 10th Amendment Center, and we see you watching Lexington, which we've never even discussed on the show. Right. And if we haven't discussed it on the Gold Standard, it doesn't even exist. It doesn't even happen. And awesome posts from his blogs, just great stuff. So I really implore people, and we're going to have links to all that in our show notes. But Mike has been spending, really maybe a little too much time on Facebook. Mike, I'm going to say maybe a little too much.
Yeah, I think I need a Facebook break. You remember the episode from Friends where Rachel and Ross had their break?
Yes.
I think I need a Facebook break.
Yeah. Well, my Anna Kay really likes Friends, and honestly, I'm not a huge Friends fan. And so you just made her day. This is now already her favorite episode of the show because there's a Friends reference in it.
There we go.
Yeah. So I definitely understand needing a break. But tell people really quick before we get into all the reasons why Jeff Sessions sucks, why it is you need a break from Facebook.
Well, I honest to God think that some of the people that are finding my Facebook page, so not necessarily my personal page, but my professional page, I think some of them might be actually retarded. like, I'm not kidding. I know you're not supposed to say that word, but I mean, it is what it is, right? I posted a post. I posted a post. Obviously, that's what you do, right? And all it said was that if your constitutional argument is that Obama did it, then you don't have any principles.
Yeah.
And I really wasn't thinking of any issue specifically. It was just a general reference. And you hear this all the time. You'll say, well, the president doesn't have the constitutional authority to do X, Y, and Z. Well, Obama did it. Well, if that's your constitutional argument, then you don't have a constitutional principle, because if you really care about the Constitution, then it should matter no matter who's breaking it. So if Trump broke it, you should not like that. And if Obama broke it, that's what the post was about. Well, now, notice, I just told you the post. Notice there's no reference in that post at all to immigration. Mm-hmm. The conversation immediately launches into immigration, which blew my mind. I'm like, where are people getting? Okay, I understand this is the topic du jour of the day. So I made a concerted effort to tell people this is not about immigration. Because I can understand, it's a generic post. You kind of impose your worldview on it. But even after I said that, people continued to want to debate me about immigration and post links about immigration. I'm sorry, that's retarded. If you can't understand that simple little bit of English, then... and so I actually started blocking people, which is really unusual for me. I'm not much of a social media blocker. I'm a free speech kind of dude, but I don't know. All of a sudden, I became a closed borders libertarian and started physically removing people from my social media platforms.
So let me tell a really quick story, because I love to take liberties like that as the host of a show. We did an episode. It was episode 15. So way back in the day, when we were in the teens. We did an episode with Jeffrey Tucker. And I like Jeffrey Tucker, and he came on and he had some really thoughtful stuff. He had like in the weeds deep libertarianism stuff. None of this just we're fiscally conservative and socially liberal, but I mean like really in the weeds stuff, and it was great. I really enjoyed it a lot. And that was the first episode we had ever done where I genuinely got negative feedback. I mean, like, genuinely people posting on the episode, like, ugh, no thanks. So there's a guy who's like a cashier at Kmart who discovered libertarianism 7 minutes ago, but I'll have you know, this Jeffrey Tucker fella, what an idiot.
He doesn't know anything.
He doesn't, yeah, exactly. And like for me, it's not even the particular issue. For me, it's just more the hubris of like we love to make fun of Paul Krugman, right? And we think he's wrong. Right. But I would never walk up to the man and say, "You're an idiot. I'm way smarter than you," because that's probably not true. And he's got the credentials, and you can't just wipe away a man's body of work because you disagree with the last thing he said. That's not how it works in the intellectual community. And so the amount of people that were like, there was this one guy, we'll call him Dale for the sake of argument, because that's what his name was, and he was saying no thanks to Tucker. Ugh. We'll skip this one. And I was like, this was like the best episode we had. What are you talking about? He said, frankly, I mean, if you're watching a libertarian show, he didn't even say anything controversial for a libertarian show. But because he was a guy that, made some list somewhere of the people who are not approved for this man's particular tendencies, anything he said must have been just trash, right? And so I have a hard time with people who, so they're coming onto your page. So they're entering into your intellectual space to let you know that, this position, so they're signaling, right? So they're announcing to everyone else, "Hey guys, I just wanted to show up at Mike's house to tell you Mike is wrong. Everyone listen to me, guys. Mike's wrong." What the hell is that?
Let me give you an example of that same kind of hubris. So, I mean, I don't know a lot about a lot, but I do know something about the Constitution, right? I mean, if you've followed my work at all, I've spent the last basically decade studying the Constitution. I've read the ratification debates. I'm a Constitution nerd. I know something about the Constitution. I had this dude on this same thread, incidentally, tell me that, well, before you start arguing about the Constitution, you should really read the whole thing in the Federalist Papers. I'm like, really? I mean, don't you, like, honestly, if I'm in a debate with somebody on social media, I will stalk their page to get a kind of an idea as best I can of who they are or what their background is. Mm-hmm. You would think you would do that. I mean, it's like telling Albert Einstein, really, if you're going to talk about physics, you should go read this college physics book. People.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you know what the worst is that I'm certainly no celebrity, so I'm sure when you're getting like 80,000 notifications a minute, it's hard to keep up with them. But but I do something similar to you do. So when people like the show page or comment or whatever, I'll click to see just a really broad stroke of what their profile looks like. And basically, if it's anything that even remotely resembles constitutionalism, libertarianism, anarchy, then it's whatever, Right. We can agree to disagree within that realm. But when people, if it's Feel the Burn 2020 or something, or hashtag MAGA, I'm like, first of all, how did they even find this page? I don't understand, because I feel like they're going to be offended 15 seconds into this episode, and then they're going to unsubscribe. So part of me kind of wonders how they found me in the first place. Like, maybe they heard me say one thing negative about Obama, and then it's like, oh, he's one of us. And then the next day, it's like, oh, this guy's an idiot. So social media.
Well, I think that there's this. I think there's this thing. I was thinking about this today. I think there's this mentality that a lot of people have that there's only two teams. Mm-hmm. So if you're not Team Obama or Team Hillary, then you must be Team Trump. Mm-hmm. And if you're not Team Trump, then you must be Team Obama. I had this same Facebook thread. This Facebook thread was a hot mess. Same Facebook thread. This guy told me, well, yeah, you spent the last 8 years cheering on your hero, Obama. What? I've never done that. But that's the mentality. So if somebody heard you say at one point something negative about Obama, well, then you must be Team Trump. Mm-hmm. Now, if you say something negative about Trump, all of a sudden, there's no conception in a lot of people's head that there could be a position that is neither pro-Trump nor pro-Obama. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not going to say who it was, but I was watching a video right before we came on that was a guy who has like millions of subscribers, who did a video about the migrant crisis and children being ripped from their parents, yada yada yada. Let me take that back. That was the title of the video.
Right.
If the video was 26 minutes long, I don't think I heard anything really critiquing that specific practice until the 24-minute mark, because the first 23 and a half minutes was, we ran the gamut, Mike. It was abortion, drug war, gun running. Oh gosh, what was that program that Holder had? Was it Fast and Furious?
Oh, Fast and Furious.
Yeah. Obama, Clinton, and I don't mean Hillary, like Bill.
Right.
We basically covered every hot button item in political discourse. And I'm not saying that those topics aren't important to discuss. I'm just saying we covered literally the entire political landscape, and with maybe 70 seconds left on a 26-minute video, it was, separating children kind of sucks, but really we gotta stay focused on the fight, and that is Obama. And I'm like, what? Like, you can make a video about how much you hate Obama, and it could be a good video, because there's plenty of reasons to not like every president who's ever existed. But right. The title, but that's not relevant to right this second, in my opinion. There's so many other things to discuss in the world. If you're going to write a video about migrant children, I get it. The program existed under Obama. That's like saying, well, how many presidents have been in office while the Fed existed? Well, it's more than Obama. So right. that doesn't persuade me any more or less than where I already stand.
Yeah, exactly. When it comes to presidents, I hate all of them.
Yes.
So, they all violate the Constitution. They're all a bunch of sociopaths, and I don't have to support any of them, and I don't.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I will be, for instance, I was complimentary of Donald Trump for getting something positive done with North Korea. Mm-hmm. Good Trump. And I'll be honest, and this might be controversial, but I thought that it was a good thing that President Obama made some progress with Iran, because basically I don't want World War III. But just because I say that I like this policy doesn't mean that I have to like them as the president. And by the same token, just because I don't like presidents doesn't mean I can't say, this particular policy might have been a positive step in the right direction. I don't understand. I guess, again, it's this team blue, team red thing, and we've got to cheer for our team. And no matter what the team does, then we have to back the team. And nobody seems to be, well, not nobody, but a lot of the American populace seems to have a complete inability to look at a policy as a standalone thing and say, is this policy good or bad? They have to attach the political, game to it, and then they can make a judgment. I think that's dumb.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Trump with North Korea, you mentioned Obama with Iran and the Iran deal. That one thing I've said is that far be it from me to come off as one of those libertarians who's judging everybody else's purity as a libertarian, because that shtick gets old too.
Sure.
But with that said, there are things in my mind that I think, like, I'm sorry, guys, if you're not anti-war, you're not a libertarian.
I would agree with that.
Like, I'm going to take that stance. If you're not anti-war, you're not a libertarian. So we are right to say in a vast sea of political and governmental overreach, if any of them made a move that was a net positive for anti-war, then yes, good. We should not feel it controversial to support that. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's good enough in of itself, but we should probably actually get around to the topic of the episode.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah. I derailed your entire show.
No.
Well,
yeah. Well, we just had such a feel-good moment that we have to destroy it now and go back to being really angry and depressed. That's what it is. Yeah. So right. I'm gonna do an impression for you. You can tell me how this sounds. I mean, I'm from Tennessee, so I have a bit of an accent. So
a little bit, yeah.
Let me. All right. I'm going to read something for you, and I want your thoughts. I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful. Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families are not unusual or unjustified. How was that? Was that pretty good?
That was outstanding.
All right.
You sound just like him.
Yes.
I felt like Jeff was in the room with me. I almost started swinging.
If you felt like the spirit of Jeff is with us. Oh, Lord.
Yeah, it kind of made me feel a little bit creepy.
Yeah. So I'm reading that quote from someone who actually understands how to write articles and posts. I don't know who wrote this, of course, but it comes from the blog godarchy.org. Jeff Sessions, Rosa Parks, and Romans 13 by Michael Maharrey. That was the quote that has created the waves and the ripples in media of late from Jeff Sessions in regards to the policy on the border and the separation of children from their parents, of illegal immigrants, and that sort of thing. So I'm just gonna give you the floor to share your thoughts. What they really need to do is we're going to have this link, is just go read the article and not be lazy bastards who post retarded things on Mike's wall. But
yeah, because the next thing, you've read this title and you've read that quote.
Yes.
So now I'm going to get 263 emails about immigration. And if you read the article really doesn't mention immigration at all beyond putting it in the context of Jeff Sessions' quote, because I think there's a bigger principle and a bigger thing that I like the word creepy when it comes to Jeff Sessions. That's my most descriptive word of Jeff Sessions. He's creepy, and I really find these people that appeal to the law as a moral imperative, human-made law as a moral imperative. I find that very creepy, because those are the kind of people that'll march people into the boxcar and say, "Oh, that's the law." Which, it's so detached from any type of real moral thinking that it's simple-minded and gross. Yeah. And so that's really the thrust of the article. I really wanted to take on this idea that there is a moral imperative to do something just because it's the law. I mean, not even talking. We can debate the whole immigration, the border thing, and I won't be very good at it because honestly, I haven't really read into it that deeply. But this idea that it's okay to do X, Y, or Z because it's the law, or that people should do X, Y, and Z emphatically because it's the law. If you follow that to its logical end, it leads to really horrific things like Nazi Holocaust, because you've got people that are just following orders. And I was thinking about this, and I thought about Rosa Parks. She's one of my favorite figures because I love the way that she handled oppression. And I mentioned this in the article. She actually did submit to authority, which, I don't want to get into a deep theological discussion of Romans 13, but Romans 13 does, if you read it on its face, it does say that Christians have an obligation to submit to authority. And so I kind of took a look at what does that mean? What does it mean to submit to authority? And I think, in a sense, Rosa Parks did submit to authority, because when she was told to move to the back of the bus, she didn't take a swing at the bus driver. You know, she didn't pull out a gun and shoot at the cop. She didn't tear up the bus. She took her stand, she defied an unjust law, and she ended up going to jail. But that civil disobedience, her refusal to obey, actually sparked a movement that ultimately, as I put it in the article, it ultimately consumed Jim Crow with this kind of peaceful non-submission. So in a sense, she submitted to authority, but in a sense she didn't, because she refused to comply with an unjust law. And this idea that Session brings out, that the government, you know, is this holy arm of God, and we must do what it says because Romans 13 tells us that the government is benevolent and just. Praise God, glory, hallelujah. That's a bunch of crap, because if you look at the Bible, you'll see all kinds of places where people defied civil authority, and I mentioned some of those in the article. Moses, you know, he should have been dead if people had followed the civil law. Peter himself refused to stop preaching Christ because he said it was more important to follow the laws of God than the laws of man. So obviously Romans 13 doesn't mean what Jeff Sessions says it means. He's using it as a political prop, and quite frankly, it kind of, as a Christian, it kind of pisses me off. But you know, I think the key point here is, just because something is the law doesn't mean that we should automatically follow it or be obedient to it, because, again, you know, Jim Crow was the law. Nazi Germany exterminating Jews was the law. Turning fugitive slaves over to their masters was the law. So therefore, Harriet Tubman was a lawbreaker in violation of Romans 13. I mean, what Jeff Sessions would have to say about that, you know? So that's the gist of the article, and that's really the takeaway, I think. You know, if you can separate it from the immigration debate per se, what he said is just really creepy, and it's something that government people have said for centuries to justify making you do stuff that you shouldn't do if you're a moral person.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, I enjoyed the article a lot, and the biggest takeaway that I got from it, maybe more from a philosophical standpoint, that I'd like you to touch on a little bit more, is that conversation of the nuance and the difference between submit and obey. That those mean different things in the context of what you're saying.
Yeah, and you know, the way and this was kind of one of those things. It just kind of came to me as I was writing the article, to be honest. If you look at the history of the early church was in a culture, a Roman culture, that was very decadent. It had religious obligations. These religious obligations were actually part of being a Roman citizen. So it wasn't like you're just, you know, I'm a Roman here, and they did not have the separation of church and state. If you were a Roman citizen, you did certain things, you did certain sacrifices, you participated in certain religious holidays to the Roman gods, because that was part of your civic duty. And the Christians, obviously, you know, sacrificing to idols, engaging in temple prostitution, those types of things were not compatible with the Christian faith. So the Christians refused to do it. And so it not only put them at odds with the religion of the day, it put them at odds with the civil authorities. Because, so if you actually, it's interesting to go and read some of these accounts of the trials of the martyrs, because you'll actually see where these Roman officials will say, look, you don't have to mean it. You know, we just have to do it because it's part of what it means to be Roman. And the Christians would say, no, we're not going to do this. Now, what happened to them? They died. So they did submit. They didn't start a revolution. They didn't try to overthrow Rome. They didn't use military power, which, you know, ironically is what a lot of the Jews expected Jesus to do. They expected him, the Messiah, to ride in on a horse and lead an army to overthrow Rome and, you know, reestablish the glory of Israel. And he didn't do that. He submitted to authority. He died on the cross. He was resurrected from the dead, and in so doing, established a whole brand new kingdom on a principle of mercy and peace and grace and love. So as Christians, and if you're not a Christian, you might have tuned out now. I'm probably got a little more theological than people are interested in. But the fact of the matter is the early church was not submissive to Rome in the sense that Jeff Sessions would want them to, meaning that they obey and follow every law. They obeyed the laws of God, and when it came in conflict with Roman law, they were willing to go to their death for it. They didn't start a violent revolution, but neither would they submit and obey laws that were counter to God. And I would say if you're not a Christian, there's a lesson in this too. I mean, you don't have to be a Christian to know that there's a higher moral code than what the law prescribes. So you don't have to be a Christian to say, maybe I shouldn't turn the slave back over to his master. I think we can take this out of a religious context and put it in a purely moral, ethical context and say, look, we all have a moral, ethical code that we're obligated to that is above the government. And if the government is what is forming your ethical code, you're going to have a pretty crappy ethical code because the state is force, right? Yeah. So if your ethical code is government, then it's going to be forcing people to do whatever you want them to do and justifying it by any means necessary. So, try to make it a little bit less Christian preachy and a little bit more ethical. I think we can all agree that human beings, we need to think about ethics and morals, whether we're religious people or not.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's so interesting. Like I said, that was my favorite part of the article is that kind of philosophy. And I immediately, my mind immediately started racing with analogies of how you apply that to modern day, everyday life. We've spoken very recently on this show about, messaging and liberty and how we're going to win more converts and that sort of thing. And Jeff Dice of the Mises Institute was on just recently, and his kind of attitude is that, well, I'm not super interested in the political game. I'm not sure there's any win there, no matter how many miracle converts you can possibly get. But I can tell you one way you want to package the message to win a lot of liberty lovers, and that's to be really great libertarians. And what I mean by is be successful. I mean, in life, not in politics, in life. It's just a fact of life that if you're an overweight, underemployed, just not an inspiring individual, and you're preaching the gospel of libertarianism, a lot of people are going to say, yeah, but look at you. I mean, how good could it really be, right? Because you're not really showing off for your community or anything. But vice versa, if you've got a CEO of a company or in general a community leader who does well, has a beautiful family, provides, is a bedrock, is a foundation to their neighbors and loved ones, then people can say, oh, well, if that's what a libertarian looks like, maybe there's something to that. And how I tie that into this conversation is, if you get pulled over by the cops, because, we all love the cops here, thin blue line and all that. That's another conversation for another day. But if you get pulled over by the cops, and you're talking about the difference between submit and obey, if you do something that gets your brains blown out on the side of the street, you're not going to live on to be a healthy and productive libertarian. So what I would recommend is not getting into a shootout and submitting, but I don't want you to obey. I want you to live your life in a way that demonstrates the principles I believe in can be positive for me, for my family, for my loved ones, and for my community. But you can't do that if you're dead.
Yeah, absolutely. I've made the same argument. I know some libertarians that are, I'm not getting a driver's license. That'll show the state. Not going to get it. All right, if that's the stand you want to take, go for it. But don't complain when you get pulled over and they take you to jail because you don't have a driver's license.
Yeah.
Now, I want liberty. That's my goal. I want freedom. I want freedom for myself. I want freedom for my family. I want freedom for you. I want freedom for everybody. I don't have freedom when I'm locked in a cage. So therefore, it behooves me to probably avoid doing things that are going to keep me from getting locked in a cage. Now, for me, there are certain lines that I'm not going to cross, and I'm not going to do certain things because I believe they're immoral or unethical. But things that are morally neutral, I mean, whether or not I have a driver's license, I don't think there's a huge ethical issue in that. Maybe somebody would disagree with me, but I'm going to get a driver's license just from a pragmatic standpoint. Now, I'm not going to turn in my firearms if I had any. Unfortunately, I lost all my firearms in a tragic lake accident. But if I did have firearms, I wouldn't turn them into the government. I would. So there's certain things. I think every person has to make that decision in their own heart. Where do you draw the line? Mm-hmm. Where does that pragmatism, I don't want to be locked in a cage, end, and I have to take this stand because this is a line in the sand of liberty that I can't cross. And I think people need to spend some time thinking about those things because, they're going to come up. Ethics is interesting to me. It's something that I actually, when I was in journalism school, there's actually journalism ethics. That's a thing.
I don't believe. No. Don't bring your fake news onto my program, Mike.
Doesn't exist.
I actually had a really good journalism ethics professor, and we talked a lot about these things. And one of the things that she emphasized, and this was preparing people to go into journalism, but one of the things that she really emphasized is that you need to think through scenarios before you get to them. You need to have an ethical framework in your life before you hit the situation because it's too late to think on your feet when you get to the situation. So, I guess the takeaway here, everybody needs a takeaway. The action item here is maybe spend a little time to think about, what are your ethical absolutes? What are your moral principles? What do you believe in? For me, I'm not going to initiate violence against another person. That to me is a fundamental. I'm not going to do that. And for me, it even goes farther. There's a lot of situations that I won't even do defensive force, and that's just that's neither here nor there. But I think people need to think about those things and think about what would I do in this situation? What would I do in this situation? And instead of kind of going through life and then all of a sudden you get hit by a major crisis and you're wondering, what the hell do I do now?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So let's turn this back around to everyone's favorite Keebler elf. And my buddy John, before we went on, I told him what we were doing today, and he texted me back and he said, well, he deserves it, but don't go too hard because he is an elf fresh off the shelf. And I told him that, that might be true, but I really don't know how fresh he can be because I'm pretty sure that his consumption of the souls of poor brown people has led to his unnaturally long life.
Likely.
Yeah, very likely for sure. So I have friends, and I'm sure you get this, Mike. So I have friends that'll say things like, well, I agree with what you're saying. I know that the stuff that you're saying is bad. Like, I get that. But they just can't, you're talking about red and blue. They just can't get over but why are you attacking the right so much? Because these lefties, And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. I mean, we'll hit the left too. I mean, and they deserve it totally. But if today's topic is Jeff Sessions and that's a right politician, what bothers me the most about the right and the reason why we hound on them a lot is the simple fact that they would style themselves as we're the revolutionaries. We're the 3%ers. We're the constitutionalists. I've got my Gadsden flag on the back of my pickup next to my thin blue line, but that's a whole nother matter. Don't tread on me. Don't take my guns from my cold dead hands. That's their stylized caricature. Now, we could argue that there's not a lot of substance to that, but that's in their minds, all right? Like we try to put ourselves in their shoes because if we're not winning converts and we're just yelling at the sky, but so we put ourselves in their shoes. That's what they think of themselves and their movement. Jeff Sessions doesn't represent anything you think.
Right.
No,
it does not at all.
In fact, it just separating. Just taking him, I agree with you because, and for 8 years, as the National Communications Director for the 10th Amendment Center, actually, I'm coming up on 8 years, but for most of the Obama administration, I worked with the 10th Amendment Center. Mm-hmm. And all of that time, we heard all of these people on the right talking about how horrible that Obama was because he violated the Constitution, he exceeded his power, expanded the executive office. All of that is absolutely true. And we were right there all of that time pounding on him.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden you've got a new administration. Your guys are in charge. Jeff Sessions is every bit as bad on the Constitution as Barack Obama was. Mm-hmm. I mean, just looking at the whole drug war issue, there is absolutely no constitutional basis for a federal war on drugs. Mm-hmm. None whatsoever. It is undeniably a state issue. And anybody who doubts this, I always say, if that is not true, then tell me why it required a constitutional amendment to have alcohol prohibition.
Right.
And what's the difference? There isn't. Yeah. And yet here you have Sessions, because drug war is his policy, he completely ignores the state issue. And he's going to impose the federal will because that's the policy he wants. Same thing with asset forfeiture. He's awful on asset forfeiture. He sent out an executive order encouraging prosecutors in the states to aggressively pursue asset forfeitures, even in states that have reformed their asset forfeiture laws to require a conviction. He wants the feds to go in there because you don't have to have a conviction under the federal asset forfeiture laws. He wants the feds to go in there and do the asset forfeiting so they can bypass the state laws. This guy is absolutely horrible if you care anything about the Constitution. I don't care, I mean, setting aside libertarianism, if you're a run-of-the-mill, limited government, constitutional Republican, you should hate Jeff Sessions.
Yeah.
That's end of story.
Yeah, well, and you were right in your Facebook post that you were talking about that you weren't specifically addressing immigration, but just it was a broader stroke than that. But that's the topic of the day. My hot take, because I mean, you know, I do host a show after all. You know, my hot take is that, look, okay, so as our president that we currently have likes to say that they're shithole countries on earth, and I mean, yeah, there's places that I don't want to go live, but okay, so our CIA has been deposing one democratically elected South American or Mexican leader and then propping up another dictator. Right. You know, the DEA has been battling drugs while the CIA was propping up drug lords. You want to talk about you guys with the 10th Amendment Center. I bet everybody was ready to line up with you to yell at Eric Holder talking about Fast and Furious. Like, oh, well, harumph, harumph, we shouldn't be running, our government should be running guns into Mexico for MS-13 to turn around and fire at civilians or our agents for that matter. And they're right. They're completely right. But you see where I'm going with this? Like, you kind of see a pattern of we're responsible for some bad shit around the world, especially to our neighbors to the south. And then when these poor folks decide with the last few dollars and the clothes on their back to try to save their children, to get them out of a war zone, and your response is, ew, get out of here. You can't share our freedoms. And I know I've seen the memes. I've seen the memes of the guy wiping his brow. He doesn't know which button to pick. Yeah. And one button is our rights come from our Creator, and the other button is, but you don't have as much rights as an American does. Like, right. So I'm just going to say it because, I mean, everyone hates me anyway. If you think that you're not a constitutional conservative, you're not a Christian.
Yeah. It ain't right.
So, wait, what?
Well, so I was just saying, so if you think that brown people have less rights than Americans.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. then if we can do these horrible things to our neighbors and then be shocked and appalled when refugees, I mean, call it what it is, when refugees are trying to escape a war-torn land and they come to the southern border of the United States, and your answer is, well, it's not my problem, and, well, you don't have the same rights I do. You're not a conservative, you're not a constitutionalist, and you're not a Christian.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just from a constitutional standpoint, that's my area of expertise. I get this a lot, that American citizens have rights that non-American citizens don't have. And I've seen this in other issues when we've talked about indefinite detention. This is something that's codified into law, that the federal government can basically grab people if somebody decides you're a terrorist. And the definition of terrorist is very wide and very broad. You can be pigeonholed away without being charged, held indefinitely, never tried, no due process. And people will say all the time, well, that should only apply to citizens. If you're a citizen, that would be bad. But if you're not a citizen, if you look at the Constitution, look at the Fifth Amendment, it doesn't say citizens. It says people. It says persons. People have a right. If you are in the United States, no matter where you're from or who you are supposed to have these basic rights, the basic right of due process. Like even back in the 1800s when they were trying to send slaves back south, northern states were arguing, hey, these people might not be citizens because slaves aren't citizens, but they're people, therefore they get due process just like anybody else. So it's not a constitutional principle to say that your basic constitution, I hate the term constitutional rights because the Constitution doesn't give you rights. The Constitution prohibits the federal government from infringing on your rights. But it prohibits the federal government from infringing on those rights whether you're a citizen or a person from Mexico. You know, I'm sorry if you don't like that, but that's the way it is. And that's the law. If you're a constitutionalist, then that's the fact of the matter. And you know, but again, you know, stepping away even from a constitutional issue, if you're a human being, this is what bothers me about the immigration issue. And I admit that it's a complicated issue. Excuse me. It's a complicated issue. You know, I understand some of the arguments for limiting immigration. My answer to that is we need to have a revamp of our immigration laws where people are more able to come over here and work. But that's a whole other discussion. But the thing that bothers me about it is the total lack of humanity that I see. I don't understand how you can see a child crying for his or her mom and turn that into a political issue. I just don't get it. I mean, you know, I get the policy and it's the law, whatever. Something in me says I need to do something to make sure that this child is not, and you know, people want, oh, well, it's the parents' fault because they brought, whatever. Regardless of the situation, have some freaking human compassion on people. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to wrap up with this, and I'm going to let you have the last word. So the last thing that I pull away from this is I kind of like, this isn't the first thing Jeff Sessions has said or done, right? Like this isn't the first time that we said, oh, wow, he's a monster. You know, so one of my favorite ones that happened earlier this year, and I think we might have discussed it on the last time you were on the show, was, so it was in reference to like CBD oil, marijuana, that sort of thing. And you know, there's been a lot of progress with children who have conditions where they're likely to seizure and that sort of thing. And parents are, you know, traditional medicine is not help. They have a very low quality of life, and so they're turning to, you know, marijuana or just CBD oil, which is, I mean, like, is a whole other layer of nothing. Right. And they're having less seizures. They're having a higher quality of life. And Jeff Sessions was the one who, of course, he came out in strong opposition to this, strong opposition to, you know, right to try, strong opposition to parents finding other methods for their children, and especially if it related to, you know, evil, the devil's lettuce. And his quote, like his actual statement was, you know, to the kid, to the 8-year-old who shakes uncontrollably all day, you know, and as a parent, you know, your heart's just breaking because you want to do something. Every part of your being is saying, I got to help. And he said, well, they just need to take a couple of aspirin and suck it up. That was his actual statement to the press, was, well, those people need to take a couple of aspirin and suck it up. Like, I don't want to say something that's going to get me in trouble with the feds and the helicopters come and get me for what I want to do to people who say things like that. But can you imagine, like, could you imagine walking up to someone and you see they're ragged, like Blake is just breaking apart because he's awake 20 hours a day trying to provide for his children who are suffering, and you tell him, dude, just suck it up. I can't imagine saying that to somebody.
Have some respect for human decency.
Yeah,
exactly. You know, I really feel like that Jeff Sessions exemplifies the worst kind of politicians. And maybe in some ways he's the stereotypical politician, and yet he just doesn't quite have the filter on his mouth that some other politicians do. But there's this raw quest for power and control. And I honestly believe, and you know, with all due respect to any politicians who happen to be watching this show, I really think most politicians are sociopaths.
Yes.
I really do. I really think that there's a certain personality that you have to really want to be in politics, where you want to lord over people, you want to have power over people, you want to make people do your will, you want to mold society into your image of society, and you think that you're the smartest man in the room and you have the ability to do that. There's a little bit of mental instability in that type of mentality. And I know that there are some decent politicians out there. I know them, but I really think they're few and far between. And I think Jeff Sessions exemplifies this mentality. He doesn't give a crap about people. He doesn't give a crap about the real rule of law, the Constitution. He doesn't give a crap about anything other than accumulating power and imposing his worldview on everybody else. These people should not be in positions of power over us. And, you know, from a government, a political science standpoint, that's why we have a Constitution. The Constitution is supposed to keep these kind of people from being able to impose their will on everybody else. But unfortunately, everybody wants to ignore the Constitution and ignore those limits when their personal policy preference can be advanced. So you've got all these people that are scared of marijuana. Oh, Jeff Sessions is great because he's going to save us from the drugs. Oh, man, I'm sorry, but the Constitution doesn't allow that. Well, we just have to do it because marijuana is bad. Screw all that. Follow the damn Constitution. Every issue, every time, no exceptions, no excuses. Limit these people's power. Decentralize authority. Get away from all of this federal government crap. Heck, I would say let the states handle immigration. And I can make a constitutional argument that the federal government doesn't really have any authority over Constitution. People will argue with me about that, but go look. It doesn't say anything about immigration in the Constitution. It talks about naturalization, which is different. James Madison said that the states were in charge of who was in their state and who wasn't. Thomas Jefferson said the same. So decentralization, that's what I'm all about. I think decentralization brings liberty. That's the structure that this country was built on. I say that we try to get back to that. Go to the 10th Amendment Center. Help us out. We would love it. $2 a month, you can be a member and help pay my salary, which is
yeah. It really, all of this was just an infomercial to help pay Mike's salary.
That's right.
But it really was, though. I actually
and also buy my book, Our Last Hope.
Yes, and buy his book. So real quick recap. Time to do our laundry. So godarchy.org is where you can find articles like Jeff Sessions, Rosa Parks, and Romans 13, written by Michael Maharrey himself. The 10th Amendment Center, which is 10thamendmentcenter.com, that I just made a donation to. I had made a post because in typical fashion, people were saying, well, you know, I used to like you guys, but now I don't know. And so I had to come in there and say, you know what? I think I'm going to donate right now. I think that's what I'm going to do. And now Mike is thinking, I got your money. That's what. And now we're never going to see Mike again.
I'll tell you one thing. In all seriousness, one thing that you can count on with the 10th Amendment Center is you're going to get the same messaging from this organization now as you got when Obama was president, as you're going to get when the next progressive is in office.
Yes.
Our focus is on the Constitution. We are going to criticize any politician who deviates from it, and we will applaud any politician that maybe happens to stumble and accidentally follow it every once in a while. So we will be consistent. And if you liked us 3 years ago and you don't like us now, it's not us that's changed.
Right.
Yeah, it's not me, it's you.
Yeah.
That's what Mike is saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. So thank you so much, Mike, for being back with us. You're one of our favorite people, but don't tell anybody I said that.
I won't tell anybody. I don't want anybody to know because kind of the guilty by association.
Yeah, you don't. Well, I mean, you don't want to be associated with libertarians. They're retarded. So.
All right.
Blake, you got anything else?
Yeah, just my takeaway is, human rights trump governmental laws.
Amen.
They always should. And be strong on your principles once again, because that's what it's all about. You know.
That's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah. You heard it here first from Blake.
Heard it here first.
Yep. Well, if you guys...
Isn't that awesome? Blake just actually summed up the entire show in like 30 seconds. It probably did it better.
You know, really, if you would...
at least smart amongst us.
Really, if you would have piped in like an hour ago, we would have just went and got lunch.
right?
Yeah, that's what happened. So, guys, Facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley, Twitter @Alan M. Mosley,
Right.
website, thegoldstandardpodcast.com.
That's right. And that's it.
See you next week.